And just as that happens, incoming indirect fire. I've heard mortars flying overhead, but this was different. This was more like a jet doing a show of force. So loud, and then just explosions. And so I got as small as I could, and they're just banging, boom, 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 fire for effect. And then there's a pause in the shelling, and I'm like, we need to go. And my company commander insists that this is friendly fire. There's no way this is the bad guys. And he was so sure of that we didn't move anywhere. So second round of fire for effect. Now we're bracketed, but we were troops in the open. So if I was calling this mission, it would have been HEVT, and it would have just been steel from the sky. No more Varpus.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served war zone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear a combat story from Marine officer and U.S. Army Special Operations Commander USASOC leader Varpas de Sa Pereira. His book, Warrior Withdrawal, When BAMF No Longer Means Badass You Know What, is a great read for anyone trying to understand why so many veterans, myself included, face challenges transitioning out of the military beyond just PTSD. Varpus faced combat many times, deploying time and again with a variety of units in search of something he was missing. He was finally fully engrossed in the system and had trouble pulling himself out of it. After 15 years of service, including time in USASOC at the tip of the spear, he finally retired and went back to school to study clinical psychology, where he realized what he had experienced was not at all abnormal. Many vets, for whom being a warrior is ingrained in their psyche, struggle to adapt to life outside the military, often leading them to mental health challenges. Varpus coined this as Warrior Withdrawal Syndrome, and now works as a psychotherapist to help veterans facing difficulties in their newfound lives. In this episode, we talk through several of his combat experiences in Iraq and some really challenging experiences that officers often face in making life and death decisions in very ambiguous environments. He's currently a staff psychologist at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, where he provides mental health care to veterans and their families. You can get his book, Warrior Withdrawal, on Amazon. With that, please enjoy this unique interview with Varpus. Varpus, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sure you never get this question, but I have to ask about the name. I've not run across another Varpus before. Where does it come from? Does this speak to kind of your family's background, how you grew up? I'm very curious about this.
Yeah, I have a kind of a standard speech that goes with it, and I've started to, practice a little bit of what I preach with some humility that goes in there. I guess what I would say is my mom is not a Johnny Cash fan, so she's not aware of the song "A Boy Named Sue." The name itself is a Lithuanian word, and in the past, when I was more of a tough guy, I wouldn't admit to what it meant because it was embarrassing. And now, as part of practicing what I preach, it's like, okay, well, I will specifically tell you that my name means large bell. So not only is it not people ask, it's from Lithuania, is it a common name over there? I say, no. And in the past, I'd say like my mom was, a generation ahead of Gwyneth Paltrow, So she named her, correct. Yeah. So she named me Large Bell, which is slightly better than my younger brother who got named Skaidrys, which is kind of a nonsense word from Svaidrys, which means dreamer. And then my youngest brother, they were sure they were going to have a girl. So they were going to name her Lima, which means luck. But he was born as a boy, and so they just changed it to the masculine Limus.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's what I tell people, everybody, like you'll never meet another Varpus because there aren't a lot of people out there that are going to name their kid Large Bell. And then especially later on in life, just to make this even funnier, I found out that it's somewhat of a euphemism for male genitals. Like you can imagine, a large bell.
Yeah. All right. And did the large bell connotation have some meaning to your mom?
I don't think so. I think it just sounds good. Like no pun intended.
Interesting. All right. And the family's not Lithuanian?
No, it is. Yeah. So my mom and her parents are displaced persons from Lithuania after World War II, or at the end of World War II. So fleeing the Soviets, the communists, in between them and the Nazis and the DP camps there in Germany. over to Canada, and then down to the US. So I grew up speaking Lithuanian.
Wow.
Didn't learn English until I was 5-ish or so years old. First name. Last name is Brazilian Portuguese. So my dad's from Brazil. Funny story there is we went to visit as toddlers, basically, and they wouldn't let us leave because they're like, you can't leave here as Americans on a visa. You are a Brazilian citizen. So I got Brazilian citizenship and had that until I was 18, which really messed with RS2 when I told him, hey, I still have citizenship.
I'm sure
like, I can't let you into the SCIF now. And I was like, I've had TSSCI for like 10 years at this top secret, secret compartmentalized information clearance for several years now. It's like, now you're going to deny me access to.
I was going to say your background checks must have been even more interesting.
Oh, I felt terrible for the first NCIS agent that had to do a family history because she had to do it handwritten.
Yeah.
She's like, how many foreign family members do you have? Have any of them served in the Red Army? Yes. Have any of them done X, Y, or Z? Yes.
It's probably more exciting for them to have someone like you, though, than the run-of-the-mill guy who grew up in Kansas. Has no
right. And then you see my face and you're like, but your name is supposed to be Biff and you grew up, eating corn in Iowa. I'm like, well.
So funny enough, I was just in Latvia, first time in the Baltics, just a couple weeks ago, and was really surprised how small it was, and this interesting connection kind of architecturally between like almost Germany and Russia.
Yeah.
And we did a quick tour of the original KGB museum or KGB headquarters in Riga.
Yeah.
Where they also had their prison cells. And it just reminds you how terrible the KGB were. Just horrible humans and what they did.
Yeah. So that's my mother's husband's family. Their youngest brother was his youngest brother was a, how young men sometimes will be, and he would speak out against the KGB. And then, he went to a known hangout, said some things, and the next day his body washed up. They did they said he drowned, but they did an autopsy, and he drowned with all of his organs crushed.
Yeah, it's a great reminder of what things can be like if you don't stand up. That's amazing. All right. So one of the things we talked about just before we got started was this idea for you of moving left of boom. Yes. And we've got your book, Warrior Withdrawal. And make sure I get the name right, obviously, when BAMF no longer means badass.
Correct.
Right. And that's, for people who are listening and can't see you, you've got your sweatshirt on and it's got BAMF written on the front.
That's right.
I just thought we could start out. This book hit me pretty hard, actually. I wish I had read it 10 or 12 years ago, honestly. And I hope other people hear this. They've got family members who are in, or you're a service member yourself and getting ready to leave, that you read this, because it really struck a chord for me. And we'll talk about this throughout the interview, obviously. But this idea of getting left of boom, I was hoping we could touch on that before we dig in.
Yeah. So for those that aren't aware, what left of the boom means is in the global war on terrorism, the boom is that improvised explosive device. It explodes and then we react to the explosion. And so our goal started to be in fighting counterterrorist stuff to get ahead of that. So instead of, the explosion going off, the IED going off, we have measures that stop it from going off. And then we try to get further to the left of it. Well, let's stop it from being detonated. Then let's stop it from being put in the hole in the ground. And then let's stop the hole in the ground from being dug. So already in like 2005 deployments in Iraq, it was free for all to shoot people digging holes in the ground to get to the left of the boom. And then we continued the higher up I got in the military to get left and left and left. So let's stop the guys from building it. And then let's stop the guys from paying to have it built. And then let's stop the guys from giving money to the guy that's going to buy the materials and all of that stuff. So that's what left of the boom means. And, with withdrawal symptoms, with warrior withdrawal, right now I see veterans. So in effect, the boom has happened. They've left the service. There's that big period of 6 months right after leaving the service that a lot of the challenges happen. The biggest challenges happen: divorce, self-harm, significant depression, significant anxiety as you try to transition out and have come from a place where you are in a team, you know your mission. There's low anxiety because most things are taken care of. And now you're out on your own trying to sort things out. And although I work with veterans as far back as Vietnam, when the civilian community was a little bit more hostile toward veterans, it's not like it's that much better now. GWAT lasted way too long, and people just expect you to assimilate. Well, you're done. There's no war now. Stop being all of these things. So in order to get to the left of the boom, I'm trying to get this message down to those people before they transition, where, get it down to the active duty guys as they're transitioning. And even then, with the Army, you're trying to get people to start thinking of transitioning, especially for retirement, maybe 2 years out. And so perhaps that gives you enough time to set the parameters that you can do the things that you need to do so that you won't suffer or you won't endure any of the withdrawal symptoms.
And this is not specifically connected to PTSD, right? This is simply separating from the military. And that I think is important for a lot of service members to hear. Yeah.
So, and that's one of the reasons why it's BAMF, not PTSD, because, for now, kind of working at the VA as a clinical psychologist, we use the PTSD diagnosis a lot because it seems to fit this cluster of symptoms. And we sometimes find a trauma, sometimes we don't find a trauma. Even in the diagnostics and statistics manual, just going to combat is sufficient. And even if you didn't go to combat, if you went to Benning and jumped out of a plane, that's high risk training, that can count. All of those things count. They're not exclusive though. So you can have PTSD and have warrior withdrawal. And initially I thought, using myself as patient zero, having read some of Dr. Freud's work, operator syndrome, like, oh, this happens to operators. So that's why I have these issues. And then thinking initially, this only happens to guys that have done multiple combat tours. Like, I am so into the reward system of constantly deploying that this affects me. And so when that reward system is pulled away, I suffer greatly. Started working at the VA and almost right away saw like, that's not the case at all, because I'm seeing the same cluster of symptoms in veterans that did one enlistment, no deployments. One enlistment, no deployments, and my MOS was I'm in the Marine Corps band. So I had to refine my hypothesis to figure out, what is it then if it's not the constant deployments? I mean, that may just be something that increases the variance or this intensity, but the entry-level training is sufficient. And so then what is it about entry-level training and investigating that? And now I call it like the world's best behavioral conditioning program. And if you think about it, boot camp, basic training, all of those things, they don't differ that much now than they did thousands of years ago when we were generating warriors. We still shave your head for men. We take away your name. We take away your individual set of values, your individuality, period. And we put you into the team. And then we inculcate in you this new set of values, this new set of beliefs. And then we praise you for it. So a lot of times I'll say when you join, it's like, you no longer are working on your skeleton. You're working on the exoskeleton. And what is the exoskeleton is my DD-214. And I love you Army guys because your uniform, your class A's, you got it all. And the joke that I'll use sometimes is like, who on earth would trust a TIE jump master or a TIE aircraft or a TIE parachute? It's like, well, I would because I like the TIE jump wings and I want to wear them on my uniform. Yep. So I'm going to risk my life here just to do that.
So true. One of the things that really struck me that you describe, and I think this will be a good segue into kind of your experience, is this addiction feeling of like getting back into the action, into the combat. And that I really, really felt that. And I think I've seen it in other people. And for so long, to me, it's been tied to PTSD. It's this idea of like, there's some connection there, but seeing the research, it's like it's not necessarily connected. So as we get into that, you've done many deployments, Varpus, so you know this better than anyone. What was the path for you to just get into the military? Why did you go that route?
Yeah. So just quickly there is, it turns out that this addiction piece is sort of a counterindicator from PTSD, because one of the symptoms of PTSD is this idea of avoidance. And somebody like me didn't avoid, I sought out and continue to seek out veterans. And so that to me was like, all right, then there must be something different here that's not currently in our big book of boo-boos to describe what was going on with me. So how did I get there? My dad served in the Army briefly as a medical service corps officer. And so I was born at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Despite the name, despite the languages, people like, where you grow up? And I was like, almost 100% in America. And so, always felt like I was going to go to Annapolis. I don't know why, because he was an Army guy, but I just liked the Navy better. And that didn't pan out because I had to have surgery as a high school senior. Fortunately for me, Boston University offered me a scholarship, so I took it. And then with like the idea that after a year, I'd go back to the academy. And so I was like, well, I'll just do this ROTC program in the interim. And then while I was doing that year of ROTC at BU, they're like, do you want to apply back to the academy? And I was like, well, hold on now. So I've got 2 years worth of college credits from my high school, plus now a year's worth of college credits from being in college. And you're going to want me to go back and start all over? It's like, no, thanks. I'll just stay here, with the mindset that I was going to be a doctor. So I was just
Really?
going to.
Why?
Well, because my dad was a doctor.
Wow.
And, I liked the idea of being a healer. So those first couple of years at BU, I was in the Navy program, just going to do pre-med, biochem, all of that stuff. And then go to USUS, the Uniformed Services Medical School. And then, my dad was like, this is a great deal because then you're paid a good wage when you're an intern and a resident and all that stuff. Within a year or so, I realized, yeah, that's not for me. Still like the idea of being a medic. So I became an EMT. But I kind of went to the other side of the house and was like, I don't want to necessarily help people. So what is the best way to do the warfare, do the damage? And they're like, well, you could be a SEAL. And I was like, well, all right, so put me in for that. And they said, actually, you can't because your eyesight's too terrible. Like when I go to do my eye, well, it used to be when I would do my the eye test, it'd say, what's the low, how it goes, like, what's the lowest line you can read? And I would say, well, I know there's an E on the chart, but I can't see it. So then they'd be like, yeah, you can't go special ops. And I said, well, what's the next closest thing? And I said, well, you go be a Marine. It's like, fine, put me in for that. So they transferred my scholarship over from the Navy to the Marines, which really upset my father, who was like, what the hell are you going to do with a Marine? You could have been a nuclear engineer and done all this other stuff, but now you're just, what are you going to be, a police officer? And I said, maybe. I don't know.
Wow.
But that's how I got into the Marines, 2.0, good to go, right? So got my commission, left the biochem field and did mathematics. So my undergraduate degrees in math, and got commissioned in 1999. So kind of like almost perfect timing to go through the basic school, did well enough there. They wanted to send me into human intelligence, given my background, but I said, no, thank you. Put me in infantry. And I did well enough at the basic school to select for that MOS. For those that aren't Marines, that aren't necessarily aware of how we do our business, like when you join the Army, you got your MOS basically from the get-go. That's where you do basic. For the Marine Corps, everybody joins the Marine Corps, goes to the basic school, and within those 6 months, you find out what your specialty is going to be. And it's usually based off of how you perform in that 6-month course. So following that, went to the infantry course, did well enough there, was a pretty good swimmer. So when they needed somebody to go to Coronado for a month to be a scout swimmer, they're like, I think we literally did like Rochambeau to see which one of the lieutenants went, and I won. So I shipped out to Camp Pendleton, then down to Coronado to do boat company. So this is like the Zodiacs. River.
It's called a scout swimmer, Varpus?
Yeah.
I never heard of that. Okay.
Yeah, so well, it used to be, and I don't know that we're keeping this program up anymore, but for the Marine Expeditionary Units, you'd have a helicopter, like a company that would specialize in helicopter operations, an infantry company that would specialize in the tracks. So those are those big gators, the AAVs. And then the last company was the Zodiac company, the small boat raid company.
Mm-hmm.
And the great thing I mentioned, I think in the book too, about the small craft company is that you had to be a WS2 swimmer. You had to be a pretty good swimmer and had a pretty good PT test. So typically we got the better fit guys in the boat company to get all the skills to do that. So we don't, you'd have to teach Marines to be the coxswains for the boat, teach some Marines to be the mechanics for the boats. And then when you're doing your boat raids, you would pull up just off the shore about 500,000 meters out, and then you'd kick out about 16 guys to swim to shore to make sure the beach was secure.
Just a quick word from our sponsor, Mint Mobile, and we'll get right back to this combat story. With big wireless providers, what you see is never what you get. Somewhere between the store and your first month's bill, the price you thought you were paying magically skyrockets. With Mint Mobile, you'll never have to worry about gotchas ever again. When Mint Mobile says $15 a month when you purchase a 3-month plan, they mean it. As I mentioned before, I re-upped my plan with Mint Mobile, and there were no hidden charges or gotchas. I don't all of a sudden see some extra charge I wasn't expecting, and here are some of the things I find important. First off, Mint Mobile is here to rescue you with premium wireless plans starting at $15 a month. I can use my own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring my phone number along with all my existing contacts, which is great. Plus, all plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, go to mintmobile.com/combat story. That's mintmobile.com/combat story. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/combat story. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. And now, back to this combat story.
So I spent about a month learning how to do that, going up and down the coast of Coronado, San Diego, seeing a lot of things that I wish I didn't see, that happens on the beach, getting sugar cookied a lot, so this is kind of that, how the military can make a great thing and ruin it. So for a long time, I never wanted to go back to the beach but it is what it is. So did the scout swimmer stuff, then did the whole company boat raid package. And then we did our expeditionary unit to Okinawa. And I was just a platoon leader, platoon commander. And it wasn't enough for me. So I was like, this is great. Straight leg is fine. I feel like I'm a high caliber individual. So I'm looking to try to go to recon.
Why wasn't it enough?
I don't know. Right. So it just didn't seem like I was operating at my maximum capacity, I guess is the best way to say that. And there's some funny stories that I got with that first company commander in there in the book where I'm like, hey man, like there are better ways to do this. One that's not in the book that I'll give you here is we were setting up to do a boat raid training exercise in Okinawa, where we would take the boats from Kin Blue, one of the beaches, and motor across the bay to Camp Courtney and hit a target there. So the target was the challenge with small craft company is you can't wear body armor on those boats or you'll drown. So our targets typically had to be less fortified because you're on the Zodiac boat. You can only do these at night. When you're on the water, you're literally a sitting duck, but you're a duck with a 55 horsepower engine. And the boats, you could only carry about 108 Marines on the boats, and they break down and all these things. So, the joke used to be that we would have to invent reasons to use the boat company. So one of the things that they added to it was like, well, you're all physically fit. So, going back to our World War II mindset, like Point to Hawks, like, well, you guys will also do cliff assaults, which works for Southern California, because if they put a target on San Clemente Island, well, then you can do the cliff assault from the eastern side and attack the target. which then means no helicopters, no tracks because they couldn't get there. So we're doing this mission. Obviously, the target is like some radar site, and there's like 8 guys there, and they're like 6 of them are scientists, maybe 2 have rifles, and we're going to launch the sniper team is going to go in there and set up an OP, and then I'm looking at the task organization of what we're going to do, and my company commander's like, we're going to take all the boats. We're going to do this raid with 18 boats. It's like we're going to take 108 guys plus the 6 to 12 recon guys that are already on the objective to take out some scientists. So I was like, why don't we do this? We just take 6 boats. You just let me go with the scout swimmers. I'll take all 60 or all 30, however many we had trained, like all 30 guys that are trained. We'll land. I'll link up with the recon guys, and we have like a 5-to-1 advantage over these civilians that are manning a radar site, and we'll wipe them out. And then this was probably the second or third time I told my commander, you don't have to go. Like, you can stay on the boat. He didn't like that. But it's like thinking outside of the box like that. That was like, I might need to be, I'm pushing the envelope here on what these conventional guys are thinking. Ironically, also, I was the youngest Marine in the division, Marine officer in the division. So while that may not mean anything to most people, it does mean something when you have your birthday ball for the division officers, and they cut the cake, and who is the youngest guy around was me. And so because I was the youngest guy around, I had to go to like rehearsals to go eat the cake. And in doing that, the staff secretary for the division got a hold of my name. So when I came back from the deployment and they're like, somebody's got to go be a general's aide, they submit my name and they were like, oh, I know this guy. He's squared away. And so
you did the cake cutting.
I didn't do the cake cutting. I did the cake eating.
Oh,
yeah. Somebody else cuts the cake and then they give it to the oldest Marine. And then it's the tradition that he eats the first piece and passes it on to the youngest Marine. And then they say the youngest Marine, who was born in, year of blah, blah, blah. And then everybody groans, even though it's like, it's coming, and everybody still groans like, oh my God, I was, doing
high school back
5 kids by then. Right. Now, when that happens with my veteran patients, I'm like, I'm getting veteran patients now that were born after OIF1.
Jeez.
Yeah. So how old do we feel? Right.
Amazing. So just real quick, because I've heard about how much rehearsing goes into cutting the cake, but I didn't know there was a rehearsal component for eating the cake.
Yeah. So it's
Is
not
like
so
a walkthrough on that.
It's not so much the eating, it's like the marching up with all this stuff, right? So it had to be precise and proper with that and not pass out while I'm trying to eat the cake.
But getting tapped for a general's aide is typically a pretty big deal in a junior officer's career.
And when I went to the interview, they were like, do you want to be here? And I said, absolutely not.
Which is like who they want.
And that's exactly what they said. And he said, like, the guy who's here now wants to be here. He loves the pomp and circumstance and the extra cords that you wear on the uniform. So we kind of want to move him along and send him back to the infantry where he belongs. So I got hired for the job. And as it turned out, this was late 2001. So it was happening right after September 11th. And I was especially not wanting to go out of the infantry and into a staff position.
Which this is, right? Like a staff position. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, that quickly turned into a combined joint task force. So the general got tapped, it's General Cowdery, to be the commanding general for this combined joint task force we're going to stand up in Kuwait. So I don't know the truth to it, but the idea was, as they're kind of doing all their exercises, that in late 2001, we were trying to set parameters to have a headquarters unit in Kuwait in advance of the 1st Marine Division deploying there to do an Iraq invasion. I was like, another deployment. That's cool. Never been to the Middle East. Sounds great. And so spent like 4 months there in Camp Doha, traveling with the general around the countries in the area. So my first look at Bahrain, Oman, where else did we go? Jordan. And it was a consequence management task force. So trying to be the headquarters staff for if there's a chemical, biological, nuclear, radiological event.
Which was a huge concern at that time.
It was. And, while I may not be the smartest bear, I'm a little better than average. So I got interested in what they're talking about. And then I started to realize like how terrible we are at this work. And then I saw it played out in front of us when I'm watching these Army reservists with their, aluminum trash cans and Dawn soap and water with mops in the middle of the desert in Kuwait. Like, this is how we clean the cars, like the kids saw it. That's how we clean. And of course, they're unhappy to be there. So they're just like doing it haphazardly. And then the German unit attached to us and the Czech unit attached to us have state-of-the-art equipment, do all this stuff. So I was like, wow, I'm professionally embarrassed here. But it was nothing happened during that deployment. It did set me up for later knowledge in how to do counterterrorism work later in my career. But coming out of that, they're like, well, you were the general's aide. Where do you want to go? Do you still want to go to recon? And I said, yes. So I interviewed with 1st Recon. It was Colonel Ferrando at the time. So 1st Battalion, Marine, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion, 1st Marine Division, which, unknown to me at the time, nobody could know this at the time, turned into the Generation Kill guys.
Yeah. Wow.
So he told me like, well, I'm going to bring you over here. I'll make you a captain right away. And unfortunately, I can't give you a platoon. So you'll be the headquarters in service for the HHC company commander. And because we weren't deploying as large units in 2002, I was like, no, thanks, man. That's like, I'm going to be a staff. I'm going from staff to staff. No, thank you. So another boat company position opened up with
non-recon.
Non-recon.
Okay.
So 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, they needed an executive officer. So I was like, all right, I'll take that. So got to go back to Coronado for a couple months. This time I went to the navigator course to learn how to plot on charts and drive the boats to where they needed to go. And then in preparation for the 15th Marine Expeditionary Unit, which set sail in January of 2003.
And does that one end up going to Iraq?
Right. So when we left San Diego, we were pretty sure we're going to war. And so all my young Marines had, signs on the buses going down from Pendleton to San Diego to 32nd Street with "Show us your tits." We're going to war.
The classy stuff. Let's do it.
And sure enough, some ladies would do it. And this, by the way, if you're on these little Zodiacs looking like recon dudes in San Diego Bay, it happens there too. Something about boating and alcohol and flashing.
Supporting the troops.
Yeah. So we knew we were going there. We sailed as fast as the Navy shipping could go. I flew in ahead, and so by February we're in Kuwait, sort of just waiting to cross over.
So just real quick, I mean, you've gone through a couple assignments at this point in time, and I know part of Warrior Withdrawal is about and just correct me if I get the terms wrong, but I think the indoctrination, maybe that has a negative connotation, but the way you're brought up through the training you mentioned with basic and all the courses, and is that already instilled in you at this point? Like that is set in for you before you even go into combat for the first time. It's there, right?
I'm still on my first enlistment at this point, or the officer version of enlistment. I'd only been in for 3 or so years, and actually, I talk about it in the book a little bit. This is the point where I'm supposed to accept augmentation. Like, I don't know, they don't do this anymore, but I was technically a reserve officer on active duty, and then you become an active duty officer, which incurs a little bit more of an obligation. But at this point is, 2003, I got commissioned in 99. So the year off for school. At the end of this deployment, I could quit. In fact, my end of active service date was right at the end of this deployment. So it's like they made decisions for me, which I didn't necessarily agree with, but they accepted things on my behalf in order to make the deployment, all of that stuff. And, in retrospect, I guess I'm fine with it. But that's that piece that's done. So the indoctrination happens early. the reality for me is it happened even before I was commissioned, because mostly it happens at officer candidate school,
Yep.
which I went to between junior and senior year of college. But the reward system is there. And already I was, okay, I'm unlike the other officers in my battalion having, this is now my third deployment. Whereas for some of them, this is just their second.
Yeah.
And, then we cross the border, do OAF1, and we get back on the boats to sail home. And I was thinking like, well, that's it.
You thought you were heading out.
Yeah. I was so frustrated with my chain of command. I hadn't mentioned it, but when I was a general's aide, the other general's aide had a similar challenge with his company commander. And so he was like, F this, I'm out. There's no reason for me to do another 3 years to maybe then work for another jackass. So he got out, got a JD MBA, and lived his life. So at the end of this combat tour, I was like, well, the Marines are never going to go back because our job is just kicking the door, and we did it, right? Well, what did I know? I'm a lieutenant, still lieutenant at that point. And the Army will do stability and security operations. And so that was my, I was Eminem, and I, threw up mom's spaghetti there in combat instead of like, not that I didn't rise to the occasion. I mean, I talked about that in the book. But I certainly there in a couple instances was like, my value set is more important than this. And so, sticking with the professional, the movie, the No Women, No Kids, was like, this ain't happening. And I was ready for the repercussions. So when I'm sailing home, I'm like, yeah, I'm done. I'm not going to be competitive with my peers. I'm not going to get orders that I want. I'm a square peg here in this round hole. I'm too unconventional, all of these things. But they convinced me to stick around. They're like, no, we'll get you over to the anti-terrorism teams.
Okay.
Then you can go back to the thing you always wanted to do, which is recon or force recon. So I looked at it and I was like, wait, you can send me to the anti-terrorism teams and I can deploy again? All right, let's do it. Let's make it happen.
So looking back, do you regret that decision to stay in at that point?
Yeah, well, it's
tough question. For sure.
Not really, right? Because no, because I'm going to psychology you on this one. Regrets only lead to depression. And unless you've got a time machine, and if you do, please let me borrow it because I'd love to win the Powerball. There's nothing I can do to change those actions. And so spending mental energy on what could have been or what should have been or what might have been is just going to cause me to take that suffering and that pain from the past, drag it into the present, and increase my current level of suffering. And as a Marine, that was I'm a professional sufferer. Like, it doesn't suck here enough. So yeah, let me have that and drop. And then on the other side, you have anxiety, which is the future worry. So if I drag things that I'm worried about in the future, or in Army terms, this also happens with the area of operations and area of interest. So the gap between what I can influence and what I'm interested in is anxiety. And the more time I spend on that, it's like dragging that into the present and dropping out of my head because life isn't painful enough for me now.
Just before first of all, wise words. And God, I wish I was better at handling regret. Maybe that's something we talk about later.
Yeah.
In that first deployment, you mentioned kind of rising to the occasion. Can you talk through one of the events that you had there that was memorable that you still think back on? I mean, that had to have been formative time as your first time in combat, leading troops, leading Marines.
Yeah. So there's two that really stand out to me. And I'll walk your words back a little bit. I was the executive officer, so I wasn't in charge, which kind of added to the frustrations. And I didn't read it until much later, but Phil Caputo's book, Rumor of War, he talks about in the beginning how he went to Vietnam with all these ideas of what combat was supposed to be like based off of John Wayne movies, Sands of Iwo Jima, et cetera, all this stuff. And then that was not what Vietnam was like. So we'd load up our trucks, we're getting ready to cross the border, and it's like, this is it, this is war. I'm thinking about whatever movies, World War II type stuff, but this is the desert, so it'll be a little bit different. And then we cross the border, and then we just stop. And I can see the border behind us. This is one of the examples I think I talk about in the book. And then I see like a civilian vehicle coming over the breach and behind us, and it's a press vehicle full of combat correspondents, civilian types, and they drive up, and I'm like telling them to stop, and they're like, what's going on? I was like, this is the forward line of troops. Like if you keep driving that way, there are no good guys. So don't. And they're like, no, we get it. And they drive off. And I'm like, well, now I'm super embarrassed because these civilians with no weapons and no nothing are just going to drive off into the wild wonderland of the combat. And here I am stuck at the tail end of our convoy, wondering what the F's going on. So I get in trouble for this a lot, taking initiative, even as late as working as an intern for the FBI. They pulled me in and were like, why are you doing things that we didn't ask you to do? And I said, well, because where I come from, we call that initiative. Are you unhappy with what I'm doing? So I took the initiative, drove with my company gunnery sergeant. So, I mentioned it in the book, our high mobility multi-wheeled vehicle was loaded for bear. I mean, we had a case of novelty explosives, 83 millimeter rockets. So these are the thermobaric ones. We had a case of javelins. We had, 20,000 rounds of 7.62. We had cases of CS grenades. We had everything that we needed all in the back, and so much so in the back of the truck that we barely had room for anything else. And we're towing the trailer with the engineer's demo. So we were just kind of like a rolling
powder keg,
right? One incendiary round, and that's it. There goes the city block. But we drive up to the front, and I get out of the truck because our radios weren't working all that great. And I asked the company commander, "What are we doing? Why are we stalled? Like, all of our doctrine says we need to be moving. If we're stopped, then we're no longer influencing the enemy. We're not using our will against the enemy. We're not inside of the OODA loop that we're observe, orient, decide, and act. So we're not taking the fight to them. Now we're going to be reactive if we're just stationary." And just as that happens, or just as I'm talking to him, incoming indirect fire. And I have heard it outbound. I've heard mortars flying overhead, but this was different. This was more like a jet doing a show of force. So like it's, when they come in and you see the Blue Angels do it, it's just something screaming in as fast as possible, so loud, and then just explosions and smoke. And, at least our forward observer or somebody said like, this is incoming. And so I got as small as I could. I'm flashing back to seeing something way back in the, my uncle's comic books from the 50s, like what happens in a nuclear blast. You just point your head to the nuclear blast or whatever. So I'm hiding behind my Kevlar in the tiniest piece of micro terrain that I can find. And they're just banging, boom, 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 fire for effect on us. And then there's a pause in the shelling. And I'm like, we need to go. And my company commander insists that this is friendly fire, that there's no way this is the bad guys. We did this. Like this is our mortars fired this, or this is, it couldn't have been our artillery battalion because they were off on a different mission. But this was our 81s were hitting us on accident or by accident. And he was so sure of that we didn't move anywhere. And he sent me back to the rear of the column. So I go back to the rear of the column. And then, we're not moving anywhere, and I'm trying to figure out what we're doing. And now we're waiting for a section of tanks, so 2 tanks to link up with us to continue to hit our objective. And then my company commander basically calls a training timeout. Like, I want all the officers to come up here so we can figure out what the heck happened. How did we make this mistake? Who called in the erroneous fire mission? And on the radio, I can hear our 81s like, we didn't shoot that. I know what you're talking about. But I didn't have a way to talk to the counter battery guys to find out, well, where did this come from? And if they knew, nobody was telling me. Yeah. So second round of fire for effect. That one, I think, is the one that here's my platoon commander's tactical notebook. So I make the joke, laminate it, dummy cord it, take it to the field with you. It might save your life. And the 180 pages or whatever it is of laminated tactical knowledge, the shrapnel got through like 70 of them. But after that, I was like, all right, we need to move, because if they're any good at their jobs, now we're bracketed. And the next one, I mentioned in the book too, I think, so to the guys that understand the differences between HEVT and HE Quick, like this was HE Quick. So luckily we were all still alive, but we were troops in the open. So if I was calling this mission, it would have been HEVT, and it would have just been steel from the sky, no more Varpus.
So that's your indoctrination, basically, to like where combat is pausing and getting bracketed.
Yeah, like a video game. Like we hit reset. And I was like, no, man, you can't do this. And then our comms were so bad, like for the rest of the day, I just tried to do what I could. Face-to-face communications with the platoon leaders, sticking with the commander's intent, trying to execute the mission as best we could, rolling with all of the challenges that Murphy that comes up with trying to do combat stuff. And then we consolidated that day. A lot of funny stories, though. I just told this other guy, back to area of operations and area of interest. We had, eventually the rest of the new command came up, and we're all on this railroad bridge. And there's some bad guys over in this building a little far away, about 1,000 meters away. So my guys aren't shooting at it. And then these Army guys run up, and it's like, the combat action badge didn't exist yet, but that kind of like predisposition to like, I need to be getting some. The Mad Minute came up. All these NBC Army guys run up, and they're just firing away with their M16s. And so almost like the John Wayne movie, I'm just walking over to these guys, and I tap one of the soldiers on the helmet, and I'm like, "What are you shooting at?" And he's like, "Oh, there's some bad guys over in that building." It's like, how far away do you think that building is? I don't know, sir. What is the range dialed into on your rear sight aperture? You're like trying to shoot a 300-meter BZO here it's 1,000 meters out, my friend. And your weapon system's good to a point target at 500, and you're not even dialed into that on your elevation knob or elevation knob. Why don't you just save your ammo and let my machine guns do their work here? At the time, too, we had 60 Minutes had caught up to us. Christine Amanpour had flown in. And she was an interesting person that nobody liked. But it's the CBS guys, the 60 Minutes guys, saw that I was reading Fountainhead, and they're like, that's kind of heavy reading for war. And I was like, I read what I got, man. And I'm also not a knuckle dragger. So, but they wanted we were going to shoot javelins to destroy that building. And like, can we leave the camera here? And I was like, you do what you want. Yeah. The javelin's kind of soft fire, so you should be okay. But I just want all my guys down off the railroad bridge. So, we shot the javelins, got one of two hits into the window, and it still wasn't enough. So eventually, air support, artillery, and then the building was leveled. About a year later, I had the opportunity to go back and I took pictures of the rubble of that building. The second event that stands out a lot in my mind, I also mentioned in the book, is a couple days later in Azubair, support facility a little bit further to the north. We were tasked with providing security to the port facility. And on the southern side was the 3rd Platoon. And the company gunnery sergeant, I had appropriated a light vehicle. This is one of the Hilux trucks. So we're driving around, checking positions, putting people in the defenses. And he's a sniper. And so he heard like 50 cal shots going. And I was like, are they incoming or outgoing? He's like, they're outgoing. All right, we need to figure out what's going on. So we drove down to the southern position. And I remember it, plain as day, the platoon sergeant comes up to me and he's like, hey, sir, what's the drama? And I said, I don't know. You tell me what's going on. And he said, there's some women and kids in a van that are just looting the warehouse, and we're shooting at them. It's like, you got no. The recon team is taking 50 cal shots at them. It's like, all right, whatever. Maybe we're warning shots or something like that. And he's like, yeah, except they just called for a 60 millimeter mortar mission. So that's when I was like, this ain't happening. And I grabbed the platoon commander, and I was like, I will stick to no women, no kids. I don't care if this costs me whatever. I'm not responsible. I can't be responsible for this. And so I drove the platoon commander who had eyes on. We drove to the CP. We get to the battalion command post, CP. And I walk in and I ask him, did my company commander just call for a fire mission? And for those that aren't aware, typically the company in the Marine Corps has 60 millimeter mortars, and he doesn't have to request to shoot those. They can just be shot whenever. We had a little bit of an incident a few days before where he didn't know that our 60s were shooting in the handheld, and he got embarrassed.
Yeah.
And so now he was requesting the permission to fire those things. And I walk in and they're like, yeah, but they're danger close. So we weren't going to approve them. And I was like, okay, great. Yeah, don't approve it. And then I couldn't let it go. So I was like, just out of curiosity, what did he say the target description was? Because when you call for fire, there's a grid, a whole bunch of stuff in target description. Going back to me being troops in the open, and the Iraqis should have shot HE VT instead of HE quick. The assistant operations officers, like he said, 14 men in black with AKs.
No.
So I was like, oh, hell no. All right, here's the guy with eyes on. It's women and kids looting. Don't approve it, all this stuff.
This is your company commander at the time?
Yeah.
Wow. You're the XO.
I'm the XO.
So you're like his right-hand man.
Correct.
Wow.
And that bifurcated very quickly there as soon as we crossed the border, because his demeanor changed. And I'm a good rule follower, so I just continued to try to push him to do what his plan was, even though he was, not engaging at the level that you may have should have been. So in fact, he was actually in the silo with the recon guys, and he was the one that was telling the recon guys, hey, you need to be shooting these warning shots. So after that, that kind of blew up a whole bunch of stuff, because then our battalion gunner wanted to know the whole story, and he had heard some more of the story about what had happened earlier when we crossed the border. So just gave it all to the battalion executive officer, and I was like, hey, you do with this what you want. I'm going to go back and check on the guys. And so I sat down with the recon guys, and I was like, what the hell are you guys doing? Well, it's the captain told us to shoot these warning shots. And it's like, you're shooting supersonic ammunition at women and kids. So what does it sound like on the receiving end of that? Is like, like the stucco or whatever, or the mud hut, this flicks. That's what they hear. Maybe the zip, the supersonic zip before that. How would you interpret that if you're not a Marine? So yeah, they're not going to do anything for that. And I had asked him, like, all right, if he had told you to shoot one of them, what would you have done? And like, he didn't. I was like, I don't care if he did or didn't tell you to do that right now. I need to know what kind of man you are, because if you would have shot them on that order, then you're out of here. No, I wouldn't have. Okay, good. But we can continue to work together.
That's tough.
But so that commander got called into the battalion. And I'd think like, okay, justice will be done. And then he comes back and calls me and the weapons platoon commander in, the fire support team leader, and sits us down to have a conversation. And it becomes clear to me that nothing's going to happen. That in fact, I was insubordinate, and that he stood up for me to the battalion commander and said he could continue to work with me.
Wow.
And I was like, I don't know that I can continue to work with you. You were going to drop bombs on women and kids. And he's like, well, were you on the radio? I said, no, I wasn't. Did you hear the grid that I called in for the target? No, I didn't. Oh, see, that's why, because I called in an offset grid. We were going to use the mortars as warning shots. And I didn't have a response for that. I was speechless. And if anybody knows anything about who knows anything about fire support, is like, you can't do that, especially danger close. So it's like, I'm going to put my own guys in danger of one of these mortar rounds being short and landing on our own guys, so that rounds can impact near where these women and kids are looting. Like, yeah, that doesn't meet muster. So I had to meet with all the other lieutenants. There was a proposal that another lieutenant would take over, and I would go to the headquarters and service company. And I said, I know that I can tolerate this. I can take it so that you guys don't have to. I don't know if that's going to be true for the next guy who comes in, but that's not what's best for me.
Oh.
What's best for me is to get the F out of this company. And I just wanted to be honest with lieutenants to tell them that. And then I did what was best for what I thought was best for them. I stuck around. And then I ate it in the shorts.
Yeah. Like in the evals and
in the evals, yeah.
But somehow you still make it into the special ops community.
Yeah.
Right? So this doesn't tank you, but at the time it probably felt like an insurmountable.
It did. Yeah. So all of my peers were getting combat awards with Valor devices, and I got not only did I get a nothing, I got the Mufang Ghoul of evaluations. And it was so bad that talk about regrets and how do you get over something that's difficult. I ended up going over the anti-terrorism teams and then almost automatically redeploying. So by the end of 2003, I'm back in Baghdad now with the fleet anti-terrorism security teams. And I find out that that commander either had forged the battalion commander's signature for those OERs or done some way to get the battalion commander to sign them without recognizing what he was signing. And so now, after a whole rigmarole, I'm sitting in Baghdad and they're like, he's going to get non-judicial punishment. So Army Article 15, Captain's Mast. But they changed, so it bounced back and forth between special court martial or non-judicial punishment, and then finally it goes back to trial. And I'm sitting there waiting in Baghdad, like waking up at 2 a.m. I'm going to be called as a witness. And then I never get called as a witness. So I called back to the legal aides and I'm like, what the hell happened? And it's like, oh, the government lost the case. Like, how did you lose the case? It was pretty clear cut. He did this stuff. And the battalion commander, who ended up becoming a 3-star general, I think he held that against the system and that guy for his entire career. But sitting now in Baghdad, which is way different than, like, I was like a legit combat veteran at that point in time. And now I'm sitting in the green zone where David Letterman is showing up and throwing footballs into this pool. And I'm around all these civilians, and we're there because the Al Rashid Palace got rocketed. And by the way, they still have, drinking going on there. I mean, I won't forget it. Like, I'm in Baghdad, this 2003 or maybe 2004, maybe it was New Year's Eve, but there's a hash house run in the green zone in the middle of, Sadr City is still popping off. And I was like, what is going on here? And it's in those moments that I started to realize, like, I had just taken for granted everybody who says they're a Vietnam veteran. I just assume they're in the IADRANG or wherever. And now I'm like, oh, there's like 30 of you MFers for the one guy that pulled triggers.
Damn. So you needed the outlet. You had to get to recon or something else.
Well, I mean, I was happy there. And then as soon as we got back from that one, I think I just went to like a close quarters battle course. And then we turned around and we went right back to Bahrain for 7 months. And I sort of like that. Like, I think I thrive in chaotic environments. And so I like being on a pager. And so the reason we're in Bahrain, our platoon, is we're there, in case something happens. And as it turns out, some stuff happened in Saudi. So we just get deployed to Saudi. Some stuff happens, so we get deployed to Africa. I was like, this is great. This was more of my speed too, because it was well away from the flagpole.
Yeah.
And it was, hey, you captain. I mean, I was talking about this the other day. We're in the middle of Africa. We are 13 hours drive from the nearest medical facility. And the only air support that can help us is on 180-minute alert. So in 3 hours, the CH-53s will be spinning to come get us. So if anything happens,
you're on your own.
Right.
Okay. But that is your speed. You've found.
So that was that's fast company from there. I got back from that deployment, and they're like, "You're too senior now. You can't take another platoon out. So, we're gonna." I don't remember what they said they were gonna do, but I was like, "F that. I'm gonna go be an individual augment." So this gets into that point of like, it's not enough. I had to keep going, and I was like, "You need people to go do the military transition teams." Yeah, I'll do that. I'll go live with 200 Iraqis. That's the special forces mission. That's kind of close to what I wanted to do anyway. And they're like, "All right, we'll send you down to 2nd Marine Division in North Carolina, and you can do that." And I show up to North Carolina and like, "No, we need you to be a logistics guy doing embark in Kuwait." It's like, are you sure? Do you not have a logistician that wants to do this job so that I can do the infantry job? And there's some adjutants there that made it happen. So I went in with the G3 and then got out of hided into a MIT. And so I spent a whole year in Iraq. This is all of 05. And I joke that it's great because then I could say that the Red Sox were still the World Series champions, because 2005 never happened. Come back in 06, and then I have to go to the correct level school. And same mindset, if I go to the Marine school, that's a year long, or I can go to the Army school, which is 6 months long, and get back. Because at this point in time, this is 06. So, Fallujah had happened in 04, and then second Fallujah, and we're still rocking and rolling. Afghanistan is still going. So I was like, I don't want to spend a year in school. I'm going to do the shorter course, and then I'll go back to the infantry. So I go down to Benning, and while I'm there, some of the Army Special Forces guys come down and they give a no foreign brief. And just sort of out of curiosity, I was like, "You guys don't take Marines, do you?" And the recruiter was like, "Yeah, we do." I said, "All right, what do I got to do?" And he said, "You got to be branch qualified." I said, "I'm a Marine. I don't know what that means." He's like, "Well, you got to be a company commander, or you got to be an ODA leader if you're SF." So like, okay, so if I go do my company command tour, then I can, try out for you guys. He's like, "Yeah, great." So I get my orders. I do another tour, fly over company command tour with the Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, north of Fallujah. Just seeing more of how that counterinsurgency stuff goes.
That's company command you did in that role?
Yeah.
Damn. Infantry. Okay.
But there's another combat story in there too, like a combined ambush, which maybe I'll get to. But so at the end of that, I start calling to try to get over to SOF, and they're like, all the moons have to align. Like, you have to be ready for orders. You have to have an application that they're willing, they want to issue you invitation. And now I was branch qualified, so you have to be up for orders. I have to have a good packet for them to go, and then the timing has to work out for assessment selection. So I call the program office or special operations directorate, and they're like, "No, you're not up for PCS orders, so we're not going to submit your stuff." It's like, all right, well, what do I do? Like, just do your next company command tour. So I did another company command tour, moved over from a line company to the weapons company, some more fire support stuff. This was the 13th MU in 2009. So that's the Maersk, Alabama, Captain Phillips MU.
Yeah, wow.
And more time in Africa, more time in Bahrain. My ship was hit by a submarine. Funny story most people don't know about. Like, just surfaced right into the bottom of our boat in a huge hole. So I come back from that one, and now I'm like, all right, now the stars aligned, right? Is the monitor, the guy who cuts me orders, and the program office that says, "We'll submit your paperwork." And now my branch is qualified with a lot of green leads. And can I go? And I don't know what was going on between the trifecta of people that had to make decisions. But at some point in time, they pushed my application to a different place. And then finally I got, waiting for my invitation. The guy who cuts orders is like, "You can't stay with 1st Marine Regiment. I need to move you." So I was like, "Well, I'm trying out for this special operations unit. Can you just keep me in in Pendleton, and he sent me over to the School of Infantry. So I go over to the School of Infantry, executive officer for the Infantry Training Battalion, with the invitation in hand to go to ANS. And I go to ANS and pass. All this time, people are like, "You'll never make it. They don't want you. You're not good enough." All that stuff.
So what exactly is this unit that you're trying out for then?
So the Marine Corps was trying to develop their MARSOC program, and I was told I was too old for that. And so I was going to go to a different unit that has a more focused mission set that's part of USASOC.
Got it. Okay.
So that would require an assessment selection piece and then a training course.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, when did you go to Benning for that course? Because I was there from like March of 06 to August of 06 at the command course, at the maneuver captain's career course.
Maybe a little later. It's about 06.
That's crazy. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, into 07. So
okay.
like
yeah, so just probably the next class or two, huh?
I'd have to check what my jump wings say, because I went to jump school after the captain's course.
Got it. Okay, so you go through this. Can we go back to when you're a company commander north of Fallujah? I mean, how many guys are you responsible for at this point?
We had like about 180 in the company between attachments.
Wow. All right, yeah. Let's hear a story from that. Just I guess I'm a little bit surprised the way you described your first deployment and like the bad evals. Company command in the Marine Corps and like an infantry line company is no small feat.
Yeah,
I would imagine.
Well, some of it helps that I started to get good evals from the anti-terrorism teams, and then I got great evals as an operations guy in the MIT. Which actually, there's a pretty funny story that I think I talk about in the book too, where it's like when you only have 9 guys in a 3-vehicle convoy and you get IED'd, it's like I'm not even a CAV unit. So I realized that the dismounts to go inspect this vehicle is me and the interpreter, and the interpreter ain't armed.
Yeah.
So because we got secure, trying to provide security around the vehicle. Turret gunners got to stay in the turret, drivers got to stay in their vehicles, and my driver is the corpsman. And so it's just me and the terp. And I was like, all right, well, let's see how this goes. And he's just walking next to me, and I have an M4 and I have a 9 Beretta M9. And so we flank, come over, and then, when we're within 25 yards or so, I realize like I can trust him to a certain degree, but I need to do the body search. So it's a dilemma. And I was like, all right, I unclip my M4 from my sling. I put it on fire for him, and I hand it to him. And I'm like, if you pull the trigger, it will fire. So I want you to kind of stand over there, so that we would kind of make like an L here. And then I close the remaining distance with the M9, and then holster it, do my search, and they have nothing on them. I'm almost positive they dropped the mortar round that hit us, because there's a hole in the truck floor. And there's I don't know if this is my empathic ability kicking in, but I was like, not only are you guys lying about where you're going, and you have a hole in your floor, and we just got detonated with no command, anything in this middle of the desert, but it's like there's nothing I can do with you two guys. So just like sent them on their way. So kind of going back though, the good evals, being the honor graduate out of the Army's course, I got into actually it was 2006 that I got nominated for the top infantry officer, top combat arms officer in the Marine Corps. Wow.
We also, at my Marine or maneuver captain's career course, it was another Marine who was the honor grad.
Yeah.
So just, you all do it right. They send good guys there.
And we're usually 3 years older than the Army guys, because you come out of your first tour, and we've all done.
That's true. That's true.
A lot of odd things there, but the
So things were looking good for you at that point.
They were actually, it's not 2006, it was 2007. So that it was that deployment that I got nominated to be as the top guy. And then they didn't give it to me because it was like, we can't keep giving it to the combat guys. So they ended up giving it to the guy who sat on the rock in Okinawa, and did good training. But we show up there, do the Coin Academy in Taji, get, the company flies in. We'd gone early to do the Coin Academy. And I get this area north of Fallujah. And this ties in a little bit to the Warrior Withdrawal, because I talk about how I was fully in the system at that point. I was in the matrix, right? And so prior to that deployment, I've got this stellar E5, and he doesn't want to reenlist. All he wants to do is open up a gym/strip club in Texas. And I was like,
under one roof?
Yeah, basically.
This guy's thinking outside the box.
Correct. I don't know how that works, but I guess if you get your membership, more power to you. And he was stellar. Like, he was rated, one of the best in the division. And so here I am as the company commander, and I'm doing all of those things that I would see happen down the road, where I'm now starting to use all of my skill set to shame him, to convince him, to prod him to reenlist. Like, we're going to the same area you just did 2 combat tours to. I need you to go there because you have the leadership. If awful things like, if you don't go, people will die. Like, and he didn't want to go. And so at some point I resolved to that he wasn't going to go. And I ended up doing what we always do with guys that are coming up at the end of their contracts, which is kick them out of the unit. And they go hand out basketballs at the gym, or they go check IDs at the main gate because you don't have enough time left on your contract. We don't want you here. So we send them elsewhere. But deploy.
So he does not go with you.
He does not. No.
Okay. So despite your best efforts at manipulation.
Correct.
And that's you in the system. Like, you'll do anything to get this guy to go.
Yeah.
Including manipulating him to. Yeah. I see what you mean. Yep.
And why wouldn't I? And it was only after that deployment, I think, that I started to change a little bit and recognize that that's bad leadership. I mean, I knew bad leadership, but I didn't realize that that was a component of bad leadership.
Sure. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Where then when I went over to the weapons company as the company commander, I started to think more about what is the best thing that I can do for the Marine, even if that comes at a cost to me as the commander.
Yeah.
So it's like, this would be better for you. You go do that job. I'll hate to lose you, but fair winds and following seas. So that deployment to north of Fallujah, a town called Fallujah, had been previously been patrolled by a cav unit. And because they have no dismounts, they don't actually patrol. They would just do rolling, vehicle mounted patrols, and they would get IED'd all the time. So then they wouldn't patrol at all unless the route had been cleared by the route clearance unit. So now the engineers are really the only ones that are rolling, and all they're doing is rolling up and down the road, and they're not idiots. So they would just watch the mine rollers come back and forth, and then the cav unit guys would go, and then they detonate on the cav guys, and the cav guys have no dismounts. So they started to borrow Marine platoons from the Marine battalion in Havania to actually do the work of clearing houses. But all that is to say is it kind of set up a Wild West for my company AO. And so one of the first things we realized is okay, we have to actually go through here and open all the doors, go in all the buildings and clear this area out. And we got halfway through and set up a platoon patrol base. And so then in August, I deployed in June, the company came in July. So by August now, the IEDs started striking our guys. And so we had the first platoon was doing a movement with their vehicles. One of their vehicles is detonated, and it's in a canal. And so it's a catastrophic kill. KIA seriously wounded. And I launched the QRF. So the QRF, another platoon rolls out, and it's nighttime. They're not so familiar, and they overshoot where they're supposed to link up with that platoon to help them Kazabac, and they end up hitting another IED and engaging in a direct firefight. So I have no QRF. We're short vehicles. And so it's like, all right, all that's left is me and my 13-man PSD, personal security detail. So we roll out and consolidate with the second IED strike, trying to get back to that first IED strike and all the shenanigans that go along with trying to get casualties out of there. Like, there's one end of the morphine needle that you're supposed to stick into the guy who's injured, and make sure you stick that part into the guy who's injured and not in yourself. But I had a Marine who did that. So he also has to get medevaced. And still, there was a short direct fire engagement, but by the time we got there, no impact for where those guys are. Cash the wounded, do everything we can. We had to leave the vehicles there sort of overnight, and they're like, well, we'll go back and collect them tomorrow in the daytime. No problem. So the next day we get engineers to go with us to pull, when we zeroed the crypto, all of that stuff through whatever we needed to in the canal. So the next day, during the day, they retrieved the first vehicle, and then as we're retrieving the second vehicle, another IED strike. And it's like, talk about regrets. It's like it happened right outside of this building that the previous night the snipers had walked us into. It's like, that's where the guy is. And we detained the guy. And that's where I saw, some of the, when violent events like that happen, a lot of the ability to regulate emotions goes away. And then you have, the dysregulated human interrogator going after this guy who may or may not have anything to do with it. And I don't have any way to reel all of this in myself because I'm also on high alert. So that third IED strike, now we're dealing with that one. That one was another awful one. Got to go back, pull that vehicle out. And then I'm standing there with the EOD guys, and I just, see a transformer explode. And I'm like, that seems really weird. Like, who's using power here? And then, yells of RPG come out. Everybody take cover. At that time, I had one of the few MRAPs in the whole region. And so this was going to be a symbolic kill. So my vehicle, the company commander's vehicle, was the MRAP. And so that was the chief target. And we kind of knew where they were coming from. And I often talk about how I dislike heroic awards. Obviously, you don't take anything away from somebody who did things with valor. This event earned my own heroic award. But when I look at them, I look back, and now more of in retrospect, I wonder what poor prior planning caused a heroic event to have to happen.
Sure.
And in this case, it was who drew the boundary on that 10-meter canal, or not even 10-meter, 5-meter canal, where there are no friendlies on the far side of the canal, so they could just encroach, shoot RPGs, and escape, in place IED, strike them. So knowing that they're in the reeds just on the other side of this canal, it was like, how do we engage them? Because now, you couldn't even depress the 50 cal far enough off the Humvee to engage the other side of the canal. And I was like, take the cotter pins out, man. Free gun it. Get the Mark 19 going. Do what you got to do. Even knowing that it won't even arm those 40 mic rounds. So I was like, burn them out. Get all your pyro. Try to set fire to those reeds and force them out. And we called troops in contact. And the battalion is saying, do you want us to shoot artillery? And I had done some of the math already, recognizing that I'm sort of at the limit of their fire range, and they get a little bit more erratic the further out you get. So if they're going to fire from Fallujah up to where we were, I was like, oh, there's no way, man. I'm less than 5 meters from where these guys are. But we got Cobras coming, and those we could control because they could see the canal, and you could give them the guidance, like keep all, maintain all fires north of the canal. And so they did a bunch of gun runs, and then the bad guys were trying to get out of there in a vehicle. And they're like, can we, rocket the vehicle? I was like, yeah. So they rocketed the vehicle. Go back I had a pretty good battalion commander at that time. And so this was like 72 hours of nonstop IEDs, strikes, retrieving guys, calling for casualty evacuations. And I think he's either the battalion commander or somebody else. Maybe the sergeant major came over. Was like, "When was the last time you slept?" I was like, "I don't know." It's like, "You go to sleep. I'm going to put all your officers down. We're going to take over all of your radio responsibilities." His battalion staff came there.
It's awesome.
And the radios, they did all of that stuff so that we could recover. And then, for the next however many weeks, I'm sitting there like, I don't know what to do with all of this now. Like, there is no class at Maneuver Captain's Career Course for what the hell do you say to the troops now?
Yeah.
I knew some things, like I cannot have these guys back outside the wire. So I pulled those 2 platoons back and put the 2 fresh platoons out. And they were frustrated because they wanted payback. I was like, yeah, I understand. But there's nobody to pay back here. And then, start Googling good speeches for memorials. But that was sort of it, and I considered it to be a successful tour because I thought, like, we came in, it was the Wild West. We engaged the enemy. We, did our best to destroy the enemy, trained up the locals, which is another long story about funny stuff that happens when training locals. And then by the time I'm doing my relief in place with the next unit, I get a call from my Iraqi counterpart, the police force guy, and he's like, "Hey, can you send your EOD guys out?" I was like, "Sure." "What happened?" He's like, "Well, we killed 2 suicide bombers, and one of them detonated and one of them didn't." So I was like, "This is fantastic." So the locals spotted these 2 bad guys coming back into town, called their police force. Their police force engaged these guys, and the only reason they were calling me is because they wanted us to defuse the vest,
which you probably want them to do.
Well, right.
SOP, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they could have done what
shoot the vest.
Yeah. The other thing they kind of wanted was Illume rounds. So, can I shoot 60 Illume rounds? And I got told no, because by this point in time, we're so risk adverse that the stupid little plates that come off of the Illume rounds are injuring people. And so we won't shoot Illume rounds. But I get there finally with the EOD guys and, come up on the bad guy, we'll call him. I make my, it's funny, my intel corporal is like, "This is the best bat that I've ever got." It's like, "I got a 90% retinal scan." I was like, "Yeah, because his pupils are fixed and dilated."
Yeah.
But that my Iraqi guys were upset because they're like, "Why did it take you so long? Like, if we knew it was going to take you this long, we would have just detonated him. It's a bad guy. We don't care." The other funny piece with my Iraqi police guys and the BAT system is when they'd come in for paychecks, we put them through the retinal scanner. And one of them came up as being on the proof of life video for Specialist Moppin.
Oh.
So it's like, how smart are you, bro, that like you come in here for your paycheck and they know they're in the system. Like, all the guys are in the system. Like, even the guys that I trusted had gone to Buka or had gone somewhere. And that was sort of the flavor of that year, with the tribes there and the sons of shoot, I remember their name.
I know what you're talking about.
The Awakening.
Yeah,
the Awakening Council, the Abarisha tribe, and they were all in the system. So this dude pops and it's like, "Oh, let's detain him here real quick. Tell him some story. Tell him there's a problem with your paycheck.
Your pay. Yeah, you'll stay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We just need to, we need to bring in the guy to sign your check."
Yep.
Anyway, I guess that ended up being a pretty good catch because he led him to the remains of by then Staff Sergeant Mompin.
So you wrap up that tour in a pretty good spot. Like, you feel like you've done it, but I'm sure some of the Warrior Withdrawal is just ever present coming out of that.
Yeah. So the challenge there is like, is the recognition now that like I am good at this. And I know I'm better, for whatever it's worth, with all humility, I'm better than other people at this work. And so in order to continue to save lives and make sure our guys come home, I need to keep doing this.
Yeah.
And so that second deployment as weapons company commander, not as much happened. And then going over to the regiment, I start to learn more about the different facets of operations, get involved in information operations and psychological operations, start reading a whole bunch of texts that the US Aide guys give me, become a full believer in the TCAF, the transition framework. And that mindset set me up for moving over to USASOC.
Obviously, people have heard it's challenging to get in. You have a family at this point, I believe, from reading in the book, and what you say in there is just, I think what a lot of us have felt is you miss a lot of key milestones doing this, these deployments and the training, let alone. And some of the things you mentioned about, like, I think maybe you were only around for a couple weeks for your daughter's first 18 months, something to that effect.
Yeah, right. So my son was born as I'm sailing back from that first deployment. I basically met him when he's 4 months old. And I think I talk about this in the book too, where I meet my then wife and him in Oahu at Pearl Harbor. This is the first time I'm meeting my butterball 4-month-old kid. And I figure I can take leave, I can take vacation for that week and then just fly home and meet the troops when they pull into 32nd Street. So I put in for leave, and my battalion commander, he doesn't deny it outright, but he says, like, I would have thought you'd want to finish the deployment with your guys. And that's like, I can say no to that. Like, I can push back on that. And I didn't. I was like, okay, I guess this is the right thing to do, is to, do this last 7 days sailing from Hawaii to San Diego with the guys. And I was fully in.
Yeah, you're in the system with that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then in moving over to the School of Infantry, second kid is born. I had already passed ANS. So that, back to those stars having to align, they couldn't send me right away. I had to defer for a year. And I was like, that's cool anyways, because my daughter's going to get born here. I'd like to be here for some of that. But then I get the orders cut at the end of 2011. So she's 6 months old. My son is now about 2.5. And I'm going away to the training course for a year. And then if I pass the training course, however much longer there with the unit. So I got a photo of that, my daughter kind of like in a carry-on luggage thing, like, take me with you.
Oh, man.
The training course is difficult. We had like almost no consecutive days off. People, the cadre there are like, just basically say goodbye to your families, focus on doing the stuff. And sure enough, just about all of us that pass that course have what I'd call the OTC babies. So, 9 months after the course is over, they're all, everybody's having babies. And sure enough, that's when I had, my then wife got pregnant with our third kid. And I effectively missed that entire pregnancy, all 9 months. I get my 2 weeks worth of PTAD, paternal temporary duty, like free leave.
Yeah.
So I'm there for, it's a C-section. So I know when to show up. I'm there for 2 weeks, and then it's right back to the East Coast, because I left them on the West Coast. And then I stay at the unit. So I basically don't see that daughter again until I retire.
Jeez. Yeah. So with, and I'll bring it to a close here shortly.
Yeah.
With USASOC, is it, at the time you're still, I assume, in the system like this, you're at the tip of the spear at that point. Like, you can't get any farther up front. You enjoying it when you're there?
Yes and no. Like, I certainly felt like I was with my people.
Yeah.
And anytime I'd go places, I'd often go back to Hawaii to talk to the SOC Pack guys, and they would all, want to know all of the details. And I would say, like, I can tell you 97% of the stuff that we do. And the last 3% isn't all that interesting. And our challenge, though, is as like, I reference movies a lot. And in this case, I would say it's like Aladdin, where we have infinite cosmic power in an itty bitty living space.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's two occasions there that I remember specifically. The first was, I don't remember which one was first. So there's the two cases that I'm thinking though of are both related to the Obama administration. One of them being when Assad crossed the red line and gassed his own people. And so I recall getting called in that weekend, and they're like, come up with a list of things that we can do to find these things and all that. And so we did. And then we're expecting to get sent over, and then nothing. It's like, okay, well, it's been 72 hours. Now everything that we knew, we don't necessarily know anymore.
To prove that it happened from like an information standpoint?
Just in general, like there's things that they wanted to have done, and to find where the assets are, all of those things. Well, after 72 hours, we can't do that anymore. And the call never came. So the second time I remember getting called in specifically was after Rolling Stone did the Qasem Soleimani interview, and he just took a fat deuce on Obama. And then we get called in, and it's like, tell us what you can do, to sort of show our wasta, to regain the country's masculinity, because he just emasculated us. It's like, all right, what are my limitations? And they're like, no limitations anywhere, anything that will because Qasem Soleimani was the Quds Force commander. Anything that you can do will cause harm to the Quds Force. It's like, all right, and came up with a list, whatever that was, Friday or Saturday. And it's like, I'm expecting to go, or at least direct my guys to do these things. And then the call never comes. And a lot of this kept happening. And so, you're at the tip of the spear, and there's still FOMO. Yeah. Even with the guys from, the guys down from Little Creek, the guys from now, I'll still call it Bragg. It may not be your time. So there's cycles, and you might miss it. And that impacts all the way down to the straight leg guys. Like, I had a couple lieutenants that did back-to-back non-combat tours as infantry officers, and they're like, well, what's the point of my being in the Marine Corps now? And they're upset because they're going to go do 3 years marching at the barracks in 8th and I there in DC.
Yeah.
And maybe they'll come back as a company commander, but it's possible that these guys just missed
the window. Yeah.
And so, living there with infinite cosmic power, and then sort of seeing like, wait, we can do all of this. And then what is it exactly that we are going to do? Now, some of that changed as I was retiring. It's sort of just like a low, and these things tend to ebb and flow because the administration changed. And then it's like, no, we're going to go wipe out ISIS. And so the whole tempo changed again. But that wasn't my experience. My experience was more of the, here are the things that we can do. Do you want us to do them? And then the last thing before I left was the invasion of Crimea. And I got sent over to Europe, and they're like, hey, what can we do if they choose to invade the Baltics? And I was like, what we can do. I can tell you exactly who's going to do it, but you need to say you want me to do it now, because it's going to take me 2 years to build what you're looking for. And then, you're like, it's fine.
When it comes to warrior withdrawal, and you're in that special operations community, does it make it harder to deal with that warrior withdrawal, or a bit easier? And I suppose the question is just coming from this maybe naive interpretation that in the special ops community, maybe you have more freedom, flexibility to make decisions, as opposed to a more regimented environment in the garrison conventional military, and that you're slowly separating yourself from the system effectively. It by necessity has to be a bit more flexible. Or do you find you're getting even deeper into the system when you're in that?
So I think there's a few things that happen. And when I talk about the withdrawal piece, what I say now, especially, is everybody's a volunteer. So it's not like your recruiter is going to the chess club or the debate team or the ballet studio to recruit. They're going to the football team, the weight gyms, the MMA gyms to find recruits. So they're recruiting from, and the people who join seem to be already predisposed to whatever the reinforcement mechanisms are for service. To your question about special operations, these are people that I think are highly affected by those reinforcement schedules. I was highly affected by being told that I'm tough, that I'm the tough guy, highly, you're the best around. You need to do this stuff. You should be the one that's going. And, you internalize that. And then I'm sitting there at the special operations unit thinking about, like, I have to be the one who goes. And then it happened to work out that the Marine Corps is like, no, you need to go to command and staff college. And I was like, no, I don't. I need to go be the task force commander in Afghanistan. And they're like, sorry, we're going to send you to command and staff college instead. And it's in the moments like those that I realized, well, they're just going to send somebody else. All I am is a last four in an MOS. So for the guys, what I say is the addiction happens, or there is an addictive component to everybody who joins. How tied to whatever it is that's your fuel, whatever. So I don't try to label the substance. I just call it being a warrior. And it's different for different people. It could be the ribbons. It could be the badges. That's what Napoleon says. It could be, the feelings of patriotism, service to the country. It could just be your temperament that causes you to do this. And the more that system regulates that and rewards that, the further you go. So there is both the institutionalization, and for some people, that institutionalization takes its way to being just a straight leg, logistics, whatever officer, all the way to general, and it looks in this particular way. Now, there's still part of the community that is the warrior community, even though they may never have deployed. They're still wearing the uniform. They're still believing in things like honor, courage, commitment. Oftentimes I struggle, helping veterans realize that most people don't give an F about punctuality. And this idea of being somewhere 5 minutes before 5 minutes before 5 minutes is not a thing.
Yeah.
You may have had to be leaned so far forward, you're in the front leaning rest, but that ain't the way it works here, especially Southern California. So the other piece to it what I would say then is the guys that stuck around for more than one enlistment, the guys that continue to go and experience the rewards, they may get drawn more into that need to continue to have it. And I see that a lot with guys that get out. It's like, well, what do I do now? Well, I just go contract.
Yeah.
Or I walk over to, another agency and I do that work. Or if I have enough sense to not, want to risk my life like that anymore because I have a family, maybe I just do and this is what I did when I got out. I just started to do CONUS only contracts and still, am engaged with those. So how do you take away the pain of withdrawal? It's in the definition of the withdrawal symptom is if you get a little bit of your substance, it's relieved. So my reservists are a great example of this too. Like when I do my drill weekend, I feel like myself again. I feel good. And then for the next 3.5 weeks, I'm anxious. I'm all of these things. I just can't wait to go back to the drill weekend. And so for a lot of guys, when they retire, General Zinni gave this speech to us way back when I was a lieutenant, and he's like, I was a 4-star general, CENTCOM commanding general. And so anytime he had to go anywhere, like dials and phone calls had to be made. And so he got out and he told us how he was just driving from Quantico to DC or whichever way. And he's like, oh, I need to call X, Y, or Z. And his wife's like, no, you don't. Nobody cares. You're a nobody now. And while that's true, that's also part of the problem is like, okay, so his spouse just expected him to turn it off. And ultimately, that can be a challenge. And that's why there's a high rate of divorce following service. Like you could do 20 years with the same person married, and then as soon as you retire, it's over. And some of that is because, well, your spouse never entered the warrior community and she just expects things to change automatically, and they don't. Some of the other spouses enter the spouse community, and then they lose that sense of who they are. So the soft guys, those are the ones who are climbing to the tip of the spear. They're doing more deployments. It's possible that they get a little bit more affected by it, just like the operator syndrome, more deployments, more explosions, more exposure to all of these traumatic events, and then more of the stigma of you just got to keep going. And because they're high performers, their 80% is still better than most people's 100. They're 70% still good enough. They're 50%. Maybe I'm starting to notice, and I talk about it in the book, is one of the sergeant major, his dam broke and he made some egregious errors, and kind of wheeling it back to PTSD, he got diagnosed with PTSD, and his PTSD manifested as alcoholism. And it's in those, in that moment, I didn't have any clue about psychology, but I was like, this doesn't really seem accurate. But it caused me to wonder, like, what's going on with me too? Like, I'm having these thoughts that I don't want to have. And so I talked to the operational psychologist, tell him those thoughts. And he asked me, am I going to do those things? And I'm like, well, hell no. It's immoral. It's illegal. All these other things. And it's like, well, then you're fine. I don't need to 5150 you to the psych hospital for intent to harm others. This is just your training. Like, we have trained you to be a weapon system deployed as a single entity in other countries. And so it's in moments like those that I started to realize, well, then who does the untraining?
Yeah.
Nobody. And I don't fault the DoD for it, right? Go all the way back to entry-level training. It's their job, Ranger School. Nobody opens that black box to see what we're doing. I got asked the question once, like, are there any longitudinal studies on this stuff? I was like, no. And nobody wants to do it. Ranger School's got to stay the way Ranger School's got to stay. And our only if-then systems to check on if things are good are, you produce this last crop of Rangers, you go to the Ranger bats and say, hey, do you like these guys? No, they're a little, don't have good conditioning. All right. We tweak some things in Ranger School. And then every once in a while we open the box because somebody dies in training. And then we're like, add more supervision, close the box.
Yeah.
With no concept of, well, when they're 70 years old or 60 years old, arthritic, need knee replacements, all of this stuff, what have you done to their psyche? And all of that led to this withdrawal piece, talking to, and so some will try to chase that feeling or numb it or whatever with legitimate substances. I got a Vietnam veteran who 50 years tried to resolve things with heroin, got clean with methadone. And so he and I are talking, he's in his 70s, and this is, I'm talking to him about warrior withdrawal. And he's like, I asked him the question, do you wish you were back in Vietnam? And he's like, yeah. I was like, I know it's not because you want to be out there to shoot people, harm people. You're not a sadist. It's just when you are there, your life is very simple. And, Sebastian Younger talks about this a little bit in Tribe. And, in my book, I use the Churchill quote, I think, where there's nothing quite like being shot at and missed. And so if I go back to that combined or complex ambush in Sacagawea, I don't think I'll ever be more attuned to the moment than then.
Yeah. True.
And am I chasing that? Like, is this am I an adrenaline junkie? No. Like I mentioned in the book, I don't like skiing fast. I don't like riding my bike fast downhill. It's like, no, I'm on the brakes on that thing. I don't have a death wish. I'm not an adrenaline junkie. It's just the clarity of purpose that you have in those moments. Yeah. And so sometimes, just like Tribe, or I'll say to the veterans, where if you were forward deployed, so that's like I talk with them about the operator syndrome stuff. It's possible that the impetus is done in the indoctrination piece at basic training, and then everything else there is just a magnification of whatever it is that's going to happen. And so the guys that you deploy, if you did deploy and you deploy with some guys, it's possible the guy to your left or right would jump on a grenade for you. You're all aligned, same purpose. Your life is simple. You're fed. And then when I teach the class, I talk about how the military is a little bit like a destructive relationship, which is the politically correct term for an abusive relationship. And a lot of guys, when they're in, sort of feel like that, like I'm an abused spouse here because I can give, 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 and the Army or the Marine Corps will take, 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 and I'll still only ever be a last four in an MOS. But when you're forward deployed, it's us versus them. Things are simple. And part of the destructive relationship is you're dependent on them for purpose, for materials, for everything, and you get it. And that same dude who's in your fire pit, who's in your fighting position, who would jump on a grenade for you, you come back to the barracks and he's trying to steal your girlfriend. So it's like all of that goes away. And so we end up having these deployment calendars to get deployed. And then while you're deployed, you develop some maladaptive coping skills on how to fast forward the boredom of combat. You go to the Haji store, another politically, well, it's actually not politically incorrect, but you go to the Haji shop, you get your DVDs, you watch your movies, whatever it is. And you're like fast forwarding the deployment to get home, but then you get home and you're like,
how can I get back?
How do I get back?
From a practical standpoint, people listening to this who pick up the book and want to go further and they can't obviously go see you, is there a way to have like a psychologist that you might go see use this or introduce them to this to as a way of explaining what they might be going through for like a civilian if you're not in the VA system or even if you are?
Yeah. So it's still a novel concept. And I don't know that I have a good answer for that because there is no, I mean, the closest thing that I can do is really rely on the substance abuse model. And still talking with my active duty buddies, we talk about skills bridge and those types of things. And I'm like trying to figure out what it would look like. And I say, well, if I stick to the parameters of substance abuse, and there's 11 symptoms for substance abuse, and I outline them in the book. And for most guys, somebody like me, I was 11 for 11. If you have 3 of those 11, that is a mild substance abuse disorder. 3 to 6 moderate, more than 6 severe. And what do you do with somebody who has a severe substance abuse disorder? It's like you got to put them in a detox. So short of figuring out how that looks, right now the only thing that a listener can do is pick up the book, gain the insight from it.
Yeah.
I try to help the guys understand, like, it took me about 6 years to figure out what my substance was, that, I needed extrinsic validation that I was a tough guy. And so the example that I use there sometimes is now I ran a marathon with my son, and I'm embarrassed to tell people how long it took us to run. And it's like, that is that same level of, that's my addiction, right? I can't have people not think that I'm tough. And so now I do the opposite action. I deliberately say, same as my first name. I deliberately tell people it means large bell. So I tell people it took us 6 hours to run. And then almost immediately I have to add all the caveats of like, I had knee surgery 2 months prior. My son was 13 years old. This is his first marathon. And so 6 hours is a respectable-ish time.
Yeah. I think there's something just about the book where somebody who's a service member might read it and say, like, this feels like me. And you almost want to have a psychologist on the other side who knows this is how you are at least relating to it. Mm-hmm. And since it's so new. Anyway, yeah, I definitely recommend the book. Thanks for writing it, Varpus. I'm sure it's not easy. And then there's 2 questions I ask everybody before I let you out of here. They're real quick. One is there anything you took with you when you deployed, when you were downrange, that had sentimental value, like a good luck charm or something that somebody had given you that you wanted on you or nearby?
There is one thing that I took back in 2005 before I got married to my then wife. She was concerned that if something happened to me, she wouldn't get notified because we weren't married. And so I had it. If you're familiar with them, you have the red dog tags that are for like a medical alert. And so I put her name and her phone number on that, and I wore that for at least that deployment. It's something that I carried with me every
Interesting.
time.
Never heard that one. That's a good one. And then the last thing is just looking back on, the years you spent, many deployments, a lot of time downrange and near misses, undoubtedly, and tough calls. Looking back, would you do it again?
So I think I answered this question in the beginning. It's like there's no way to know. There's no sliding door for me to go through and see what the other side would look like. So the easy answer is yes. And then what you do now, or what I do now, is work on managing any regrets that I may have and not dragging any of that pain into the present.
Yeah.
I can't undo the command decisions that I made. I can't undo, who knows what would have happened if I hadn't confronted the company commander. And there's nothing that I can do to change it. So, although working through those narratives made it hard to write the book and made it take a lot longer, it's done, and those things are in the past.
Yeah. Oh, that's so great. Thanks so much for the time, Varpus. Really appreciate it. And people can find the book. We'll have a link to it in the description.
There's the picture of it.
Yep. It's a guy in the suit with the helmet with the tactical gear on top.
Just need to get Banksy to actually put that on the building somewhere in LA.
There you go. Thanks so much. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, sir.
Hope you enjoyed that combat story with Varpus. Truly, his book really hit home for me. I think it's worthwhile if you are a veteran yourself who's gotten out, maybe are struggling with or had struggled with the transition, or you have a family member who's about to do that, or will do that in 5 years. You might get that book and put it on a shelf, hand it to them like a year before they get out. All of us think we're invincible, and when we get out, we'll manage this easily. But there's a lot of indoctrination that goes on for good reason that makes it quite difficult when we transition. And I think we want to lay that at the feet of PTSD and some other trauma, but there might just be a psychological aspect around how indoctrinated we are and the withdrawal symptoms from being disconnected from that. So anyway, it mattered a lot to me. I think it could be very helpful to people in your lives as well. That said, sorry for the break in episodes. It's been a while, I know. Started a new job elsewhere, and it's taking a whole lot of time, but we're getting back on track, and I think we've got some really good ones in the chute here that you're going to appreciate. We'll do our best to stay on cadence, but thank you all for the kind words and staying with us as we go through this. It definitely is a challenge, but this is something that I love, and I hope it helps people as we continue down this path. You can always catch our newsletter, combatstory.com/newsletter, and we greatly appreciate all of your help in this. So with that, wherever you are in the world, please do stay safe, and we will see you next time.